Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Scaling Scrum, a case study on how the Nexus helped Capital One in a complex multi-team delivery. I'd like to thank Valar and Patricia for joining this webinar today. My name is Eric Neiberg, and I'll be moderating this webinar, helping to provoke some of the questions that you ask and helping to push things forward. Trish, if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit about Scrum.org. Scrum.org is the home of Scrum. We're chaired and founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. And what's really interesting and pretty cool is there's an estimate out there from IDC, one of the analyst firms, that over 90% of all Agile teams today are using Scrum, which equates to about 12 million people today doing a daily Scrum. And this is pretty incredible, something that started about 22 years ago and continues to push forward. And all of this based off of one single Scrum guide. There's one Scrum guide. For those of you who are not aware, there will be a webinar next week on Tuesday, the 7th of November, announcing a new version of that Scrum guide where Ken and his co-creator, Jeff Sutherland, will be talking about those changes and so on. Check that out at the end of the webinar as well. Just a little bit about who we are. Scrum.org provides certification and training around Scrum, as well as thought leadership, and really what Patricia and Valar are going to talk about today, where evolving Scrum to help it scale using Nexus. Next slide. So this Scrum Pulse, it's a free monthly webinar presented by Scrum.org, bringing in customers, bringing in some of our trainer experts and so on to help you learn. You can go and check out past Scrum Pulses at scrum.org/Scrum Pulse or out on our YouTube channel. And please, if you have questions, if you have ideas, other webinars you'd like to see, let us know. Next slide. So your microphones will be muted, but please, please, please ask questions as Valar and Patricia are looking to help you and help guide you. So please either write through the questions box in your little GoToWebinar panel, or you can always tweet at scrum.org #ScrumPulse. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Valar to introduce herself.
Hello all, this is Valar. I've been introduced to Agile for more than a decade now, and I have an IT experience for more than 15 years. I've played the roles of Scrum Master as well as a coach, and I am certified scaled professional Scrum as well as certified safe Agilist. My current interest is right now, as you see from my certification, I'm more interested in exploring various scaling approaches. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about how we use Nexus in one of our projects.
And hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Kong. I work at Scrum.org. I am the product owner of our enterprise solutions. I am generally thinking with our team here about professionalism and how to use Scrum and Agile outside of just the team level, and how do we make sure that that goodness that we find using single team Scrum can be expressed with multiple teams or the rest of the organization. I have a book that I've co-authored with Kurt Bittner, my colleague, and also David West, who is the product owner of Scrum.org, and that is going to be published December 15th, and that is really around a case study around Nexus. But enough about me. What I wanted to do was just give you some context around today's Scrum Pulse and the, how I actually came to meet Valar. So I think about a year back or something like that ago, Valar had attended a Scaled Professional Scrum class, which is the scaling class that we have around Nexus, that walks you through a case study. And she attended that with one of our professional Scrum trainers, Ravi Verma, who is a very dear friend of mine, but he is also a Scrum expert. So he was teaching her about that. They went through that in Dallas, and then come a little bit later, they started talking about, while she was working at Capital One, how she did the implementation of Nexus. So we've been sharing the stories back and forth, and I said, wow, this is something that really needs to be shared with the public. I really would love to understand why you came to choose Nexus, how you went through it, and so we started getting on the phone and talking through each sprint. So through 6 sprints of work. And then what you see now here, hopefully it looks familiar to you in that it's the Nexus framework, but also that it's just like Scrum, right? So Nexus is a simple framework, and it's something that at Scrum.org I played a big part in co-authoring, developing this, and also working on the Nexus guide, which is like the Scrum guide, free and out there for you to learn the different roles, events, artifacts that are within it. But essentially, Nexus is like Scrum. It's just augmented minimally on it so that we can bring up the cohesion that we need when multiple teams are working together to reduce the complexity. And this is something that works between about 3 to 9 teams. So at 2 teams, we would suggest, hey, you should just chalk, don't add anything more, maybe 3 even so. And then up to 9 or 10, you're going to have a little bit too much complexity. So, you know, we have to start thinking about different things for that scenario. But that's just a little bit of background. And I'm going to pass it back to Valar now so that she can tell you about what happened at Capital One and the challenge they were facing.
Thanks, Patricia. So before we get into how Nexus was used, I just wanted to give an overview of the challenge we had, right? The challenge in our hand was to develop a new product that has to go live in 3 months. What we realized was when we did a high-level sizing of the work, we realized that we need more than 3 teams, and in our case, it was like we had a peak team size of 5 teams to build this product. And given the timeline, obviously you can't build 5 teams from scratch, so we had to pivot to existing Scrum teams to work on this project, and we also had to onboard 3 new teams with members who are not just new to the product but also to the company. We also had to do an integration with an external interface. Over and above that, Capital One, when we have target architecture set, and so this product had to be built with most of the recent cutting-edge technologies like Angular 4 UI, Node.js, Postgre for database, and most of the team members who worked on this had no clue about any of these at the beginning of this project. So that's to set the context. I mean, like obviously it was a big challenge. I mean, we felt it was close to impossible, but now I'm glad, I mean, I'm here to talk about the success story behind how we actually made this happen.
And well, how long ago was this? Was this last year?
Yeah, so the inception of this work was sometime in January, and then when we actually kickstarted this project, it was beginning of March.
Okay. Oh, so very recently.
So yeah, our target, our end date was like May end, and then I mean, as you'll see, like we actually were able to deliver the MVP 3 weeks ahead of our schedule.
Excellent. Yeah.
All right. So with the challenges in mind, and then as Patricia said, I had attended the training with Ravi Verma, and he was like awesome, and I want to actually thank him as well in this forum to guide me through using this framework in our project. So the first thing, right, I mean, obviously I had to socialize this. Though I had attended a 2-day training, I had to socialize this framework with the team members who were present to start with. It was an easy exercise, and as you can look at the picture, and as Patricia said, it's so similar to Scrum. If you're familiar with Scrum, I just had to do a lunch and learn session, and we were able to kind of discuss and agree upon the approach we are going to take for this project. Moving on to the next slide. Yeah. So once we decided on using Nexus, one thing that I really liked about Nexus is that when we talk about a single product, it makes a lot of sense to have a single product owner. So traditionally in Capital One, it was always like one team had one product owner. So we wanted to make sure that we don't follow that in this particular case, because we are talking about rallying up 4 to 5 teams working towards a single product. So we insisted that there should be only one product owner, basically one person who is the sole decision maker. And given that we had multiple teams, I mean, we knew that this one person cannot author stories for so many teams, so we knew that the person needed assistance. So we had an assistant product owner who helped the product owner to author stories, but when it came to any decision making, it was this one person. Down the line, we saw that this decision that we made upfront was really, really helpful. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, sorry.
I was saying that's one of the largest conversations, or one of the biggest questions. It was around product ownership with multiple teams. So it's good to see that you had a team of people, but you had one designated product owner.
Yeah. So moving on, so now that we have a single product owner, it obviously makes a lot of sense to have a single product backlog. The way we did it is, so we had a single product backlog, and then we identified release 1.0, which was the MVP for this product. And then from there, we planned out what should be the scope for various sprints, and the focus was more to build product increments end of every sprint, and not like focusing on feature increments by sprint. So if you can see that we didn't split the work by feature to the teams. Instead, it was all one backlog, and the teams were more working towards the sprint backlog for a particular sprint, and that's how we built it.
So one of the things you mentioned, Valar, before was that traditionally, or generally at Capital One, the way the teams were organized was just, there was one product owner, several Scrum teams, and they were just working on separate features generally. Why was that an option of what you could do? And if so, or if not, why did you choose to kind of consolidate everything and look at it in this way?
We thought if we focus on incrementing a feature, and if we make different teams responsible for different features, one, we felt like we will not have the flexibility to switch between the teams. If let's say one feature needed more effort, then it becomes very difficult. Because once you say a team is responsible for a feature, their mindset is tied to it. Like, it's very difficult to pull them out and then say, also look into this. Then it becomes like, hey, that's not my job, kind of. So we wanted to get rid of that mentality, one. And the second reason is we felt that given that it's a new product development, kind of figuring out the integration towards the end of the project would be, again, a big hassle. And we felt that there will be a high risk in doing it. So these are the two reasons where we felt, no, we shouldn't be taking the feature option, but go for product increment, which means multiple teams could potentially work on a single feature.
And that's a nice segue to talk about your team composition.
Yeah, so now that we said we wanted flexible teams who could work on any feature, that also meant that they need to be flexible with the technologies that they need to work on. So we took a lot of effort upfront to make sure that we ramp up the teams, even though the timeline was really short, but we felt this investment was very important. So there was more focus on everybody working on everything. So we really encourage, when somebody hasn't worked on a specific technology, we encourage them to sign up for a story in a particular sprint, and we made sure we gave them enough support for them to work on it and feel confident. So this again, it definitely paid a lot of dividends down the line for the initial effort that we put in for this.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, because when we are looking to grow teams and we're saying, hey, we want everybody to understand everything, there's a big upfront cost in that knowledge transfer. And a lot of the times it's saying, hey, that we're going to go too slow, right? If we do that, it's not, and you had a 3-month deadline. So how did you get past that? And then also I was wondering, were there any specific models that you used to have that knowledge transfer through the teams? How did you share that information?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, we didn't really use any specific model. I mean, what we did was, one of the teams that we pivoted to work on this project was the team that had actually built the UI platform for a different product, and we were like building on that platform. So, and they were loaned. I mean, it's not like they were going to stay with us throughout the project. So it obviously meant that we have to ramp up as soon as possible on that platform before they could roll off. And so every member we could find, we made them part of that team for a sprint, so that they can learn the platform, understand it better, working with the team before they were pulled out and placed in a different team. That was one. And the other thing is, as I said, from the technology perspective, there were very few experts in the team. Like hardly 10% of the population knew about the technologies. So when we had people who knew, who were an expert in a particular area, let's say Kafka streams, right? So we didn't assign stories to those experts to work on particular aspects of the product. Instead, they were solely set aside for supporting rest of the team who are working on those technologies. So with these two combinations is where we were able to kind of make this happen. And as I said, learn by doing, right? So we never, while figuring out the sprint backlog for each team, we never thought of this as a constraint to allocate who should be doing what. So the teams were really encouraged, telling that, hey, this is the sprint backlog, this is the product increment we need. And so we have to figure out how all these teams together can make that happen.
So I think on the next slide, what we have is actually information about the Nexus integration team. Did those people serve on, as a Nexus integration team member?
Yes. So up till this point, like whenever I said we, I was talking about the Nexus integration team. So the way I see Nexus integration team is someone who is accountable for making sure for the success of the project as well as success of each sprint, right? So initially it consisted of the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the tech solution owner. Eventually, once the team matured a bit, like 2-3 sprints down the line, we also had representatives from each team being part of this NIT team. NIT team's focus was thinking ahead, planning for what should be the next product increment for the upcoming sprint, and also think through what are the dependencies, how are we going to tackle it, what are the risks, also what are the risks for the ultimate end goal. And this team was constantly working towards removing the impediments, roadblocks, and making sure the current sprint is successful and also the release was successful.
Cool. So
Patricia, would you like to talk about how Nexus has defined it?
Yeah, so thank you for sharing how the Nexus integration team looked like at Capital One. And I realized that I should have given some context, is that the Nexus integration team is an additional, it's a new role in Nexus that it doesn't exist in Scrum. So Nexus is really focused on removing the killers of scaling, which is dependencies, right? And making sure that we're integrating. So the Nexus integration team is a role that's accountable, as you can see in the Nexus guide, for ensuring that an integrated increment is produced at least every sprint. And this role, I get hit on this all the time, that it's named poorly because it's called the Nexus integration team, yet they're not necessarily just sitting there doing integration, right? But it's because of that ultimate, that sharp focus on the need to integrate and think about dependencies. There are two misconceptions, and I just hit on one, is that they're sitting there integrating, and the other is that they're this management team, right? And I'm hearing Valar Capital One, that it wasn't that these are really technical specialists. They're sitting there coaching, they're helping, and they're guiding the teams and the product owners on there. So did they serve as kind of a management team there?
No, this team had nothing to do with management. As the teams were reporting to different managers, so we had like 5 teams and their different functions and things like that. So no, so that wasn't the purpose of this team here. It was more to make sure the sprint is successful and we have an implementable product. Yeah.
This would have taken an awkward turn if they were. So so the Nexus integration team is really the role where we're just thinking about those dependencies up ahead. It's also one of the reasons, and I'm flipping on to the next slide, why refinement is now a mandatory event in Nexus where it isn't in single team Scrum. So Valar, do you want to talk to how Capital One used refinement?
Sure. So this was one scenario where we kind of inspected and adapted as well. So we started off with 2 representatives from each team coming together and doing the refinement together and figuring out what is the potential sprint scope and goal for the upcoming sprint. We tried that for a sprint or 2, and what we realized was the teams were under a lot of pressure, and we felt like the details that were discussed during refinement was really not passed down to the respective teams. So we couldn't really blame the representatives because with all the pressure that wasn't really working out. So we inspected and adapted, and what we did was the reps met to kind of logically figure out the focus was more to how do we minimize cross-team dependencies and what will be most logical to pick up by different teams. So the representatives got together, discussed that, figured it out. So we had a tentative scope for each team that the team would potentially pick up in the upcoming sprint. Once that discussion was done, so this was like a quick half an hour to 1 hour discussion. Once that was done, then the POs actually refine the stories with the respective team during the sprint. That will be worked on in the upcoming sprint. So that's what actually worked out for us eventually.
Excellent.
So moving on now that so now that we have the refinement done, we also wanted to make sure that there is clarity around what is that we mean by telling something is done. So in Nexus, we realized that it's very, very important that this is in place. I know of many Scrum teams who didn't have a clarity on definition of done, but sometimes it was okay as long as there was some understanding between the team and the PO and they knew what done means, but they didn't have it formally laid out somewhere. But in case of Nexus, it was very important that when anybody in Nexus, any team says something is done, it meant the same across the board. So we had the definition of done defined at the Nexus level. And there were cases where we had to kind of negotiate what it means with the PO for certain sprints. For example, the QA environment wasn't ready. So our original definition of done said the stories should be completed and available in the QA environment and tested. Because we couldn't get the environment ready for a sprint, we negotiated and said, for this sprint, it's going to be in the dev and we are going to do a demo in the dev. And then we made sure that everything moved to QA when the environment was ready and things like that. So this was awesome. It helped us align across the team.
Great. And I really like, while you're talking through this, what I really appreciate is you're saying, hey, we tried this, and then we had to try something else.
So moving on, now we have the refinement done. We have a common understanding on the definition of done. The next step was to actually do the sprint planning. Again, as per Nexus how, based on what Nexus recommended, we went for sprint planning together in a common space. So we all met in Plano, Texas. All the team members were there together in one room. And as you remember, we had the tentative scope figured out for each team upfront as part of refinement, but we couldn't really get started with it because we also had to assess what has been completed in the previous sprint and what stories have really slipped or split to this new sprint. So we had to do a quick assessment with the team representatives to see with something moving from the previous sprint to the new sprint, are you comfortable kind of forecasting and taking up what was tentatively scoped plus what has been slipped? And based on that, the teams negotiate. And then sometimes there have been, I shouldn't say sometimes, pretty much every sprint, there was at least one story that was actually planned for team A, kind of moved to team B or C. It's just that for those just one or two stories, the POs used to spend that additional time refining it again with the new team and also passing on any information that team A gathered to team B or C, and then get into the planning in terms of tasking and figuring out the capacity and things like that. So end of the sprint planning, every team left with a forecasted backlog. We actually, it was beyond commitment. Like, we actually asked for promises because given the timeline, it was a joke there. So we say, what is the promise that you're making in this sprint? But there was a lot of clarity end of sprint planning on who is doing what and whether they'll be able to make it at a certain level. And also one other thing that I want to mention here is, given that bringing all the team members together in a common space, logistics-wise, it was challenging. So what we did was we blocked a day in every sprint to do the planning, the retrospective, as well as the review, all on a single day. That means the teams had less distraction through the remaining days.
So tied to that, Valar, there's a question that's come up from a few folks. So was your team co-located, or how distributed was the team?
The team was actually co-located, but they weren't really sitting in a common physical space. So it was like they were spread across actually one building, different floors.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on to the next slide. So now that we have the plan in place, this was the representation of the board that we use for visual management purposes. So we had the left side of the board is more like the release plan, where we had a tentative plan for what feature, what stories, when it will be done, and then we had like a goal for each sprint on how the product increment will look like. And then the right side is where we actually track a particular sprint. Point to note, again, this was for the entire Nexus and not for any specific team. So the only way for us to know which story is worked on by what team is like we had the team name mentioned in the story card at the bottom. The way we did this was, again, this was one other candidate of retrospect, like inspect and adapt, because to start with, we tried doing the Nexus retrospective first with the team representatives, followed by the team having their own, sorry, did I say retrospective? I'm sorry, daily Scrum. So, I'm like, no. Yeah, so we attempted doing the Nexus daily Scrum first with the representatives from each team, followed by the team daily Scrum. What we again figured out is like the representatives who came in really didn't have much insight into what was going on in their team, where we could actually discuss and figure out whether there are any inter-team dependencies or impediments and things like that. So I think by mid of first sprint, we decided to change this pattern to start with the team daily Scrum, followed by the Nexus daily Scrum, and then the representatives took any action items and shared it with the teams post Nexus Daily Scrum.
Right. That's interesting because that's a question that I get often, and when I go to visit different clients, it's something that I see, and then they eventually change. And so what we say is, the daily Scrum isn't the only time that we can talk to each other. We can talk to each other throughout the day. But what we put through in the Nexus framework is that Nexus Daily Scrum where the appropriate people come together and say, hey, these are the dependencies, or this is what we're facing today, comes first. And then you go out and have your individual conversations. That doesn't preclude that. It doesn't mean that you can't do what works and come together before. So I'm glad to hear that you kind of adjusted that also.
Yeah, it's like sandwich is required both ways. So which one you do formally and which one you do informally is like, I think it's up to us figuring out.
Okay.
So specific to this slide, Valar, those blue lines that are going across, are they meaningful?
Yeah, so those swim lanes are by feature. So imagine so the feature column in the middle is where you had the list of features that had to be built for this product, and then you will see stories moving across. So the stories kind of where, when this is just an indicative version, this is not the actual board. Predominantly, the focus was more to get a feature done before we move on to the next feature. There will be some lingering stories that might move to the future sprints, and that's how we did it.
Great. And then another question that came in that's kind of related to this slide, so I'll ask it now rather than holding to the end, is was there a specific tool you used to manage the backlog?
We used version 1. And we also had a visual management board. Like this was a physical board that we maintained as well for the Nexus Daily Scrum.
And just for those who are not aware, there's actually there is a profile in version 1 that supports Nexus now as well that they're using.
Yeah. To add to that, it was easy. I think Nexus is so simple that pretty much I feel like we should be able to use any tool and manage this as long as we have one level of roll-up. Like we wanted a burn down for the whole Nexus with multiple teams, and version 1 has that feature to do it.
All right.
So moving on to the next slide. So as and when a story gets completed, once the team declares it's done, the PO used to go meet with the team and get a demo, look at the work that has been done, and accepts it. So that wasn't the purpose of doing a sprint review. So the stories were pretty much, whatever was done was pretty much accepted, most of it, by the time we do the review. So the purpose of review was twofold. One is to bring in external stakeholders and also to create visibility in terms of what the progress we are making. So it was awesome to do that. And the second one is, even between the teams, there wasn't much visibility on what exactly each team, I won't say not much visibility. Yes, we had the Nexus Daily Scrum and things like that. But this was one place where they could clearly see which team had done what work on the product. This was very important because something that Team A worked on, there might be an enhancement to that which Team B might have to take it in this upcoming sprint. So they will know what has been done and whom should they reach out to if they have to get some clarification and things like that. So review helped us both from transparency perspective as well as to have clarity and for everybody to be on the same page. That's it.
Great.
Moving on to the next slide, the retrospective, right? Actually, we inspected and adapted the retrospective as well. So to start with, we attempted the teams having their own retrospective and then kind of doing a Nexus retrospective with the team's input. So this again is a sandwich scenario, just like our daily Scrum. We again, for logistic reasons and practical purposes, like we really couldn't afford doing the two sandwich levels, and what we ended up doing was one combined retrospective. And what we found was pretty much what came up as a challenge or anything that's happening good or any idea that came up was pretty much common to the program, and it was applicable across teams. There were very few, one or two cases where there were items that were specific to a team. When we came across those, all we did was we handed over those stickies to the respective Scrum Master and asked them to take it offline and discuss with the team and come with an action item that was needed. One other thing that I want to, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Patricia.
So just to understand, so that's interesting because the way that that it's structured, Nexus, is that you have the one, Nexus level retrospective, what are the common issues, and then we talk about it in the teams, and then we have ideas, and then we come back together. And that's the way I've seen it work. And what you're saying is that you had 5 teams, and what you found to work best for you was that because everybody already knew the common issues that were existing, let's just talk about it all at once, put up your team level issues too, if there are any, and at that point, they can address it separately?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we did.
Awesome. How long were your sprints?
Yeah. Ours were 2 weeks long. We had a 2 weeks guidance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
One other thing is the action items, right? It was very important that the teams felt that they were heard, and we clearly took actions from every retrospective. So as part of this retrospective, we always reviewed the action items from the previous retros and where we are. So there were some that were completed, some were worked on. So we created that visibility as well so that the team really felt empowered, and they brought up ideas and challenges in the forum because they knew that it's getting addressed. And that was very important aspect in this program.
And did this came up, I'm assuming, in a retrospective then, that you wanted to change the format?
Sorry?
So I'm assuming you were saying like to change the format. You actually had the retrospectives and decided to change the format of the retrospective, which is always fun. All right. Celebration.
Yeah, this was one of the highlights of this program. So given the pressure under which the team was working, it was very important that we took some moments to appreciate them, right? And the best way to appreciate was peer appreciation. So what we encouraged was we did Star of the Sprint award. So every team got to nominate who their star is for the particular sprint. And also the stars of the sprint got together and they kind of recognized who should be the sprinter of the sprint. So we insisted that no external, no management or nobody else were allowed to influence these awards. It was exclusively the team members who kind of nominated. So we encouraged a lot of peer feedback because what we realized was it's only the peers who know what you're doing more than anybody else. So we received appreciation across the board from the team members as well as from the management to do this. And this was a big energy booster and a motivation factor for us.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
All right.
So moving on, so to summarize, I would start off telling Nexus was so simple to follow yet very powerful. That's how I see it. Like the concept was all very simple, and when we just followed a lot of things, and I mean on a retrospect, when I think of it, a lot of those simple things kind of culminated and like it made it really powerful end of it on what we could achieve. It definitely created frequent opportunities for us to inspect and adapt, and I've already shared some examples as I was walking through. I see it as the best suited approach for a single product development with multiple teams. This again, like not when we really want to bring the teams together, it has to be for a very common purpose, and there should be real interdependencies between the team, and that's when I see this will be like really powerful. Nexus also helped us release our product 3 weeks ahead, so we weren't only inspecting and adapting our process and approach, but also our product backlog. We realized that there were things that could be done a little later. We were able to identify an MVP 3 weeks ahead of our planned May end date, and that again was like, it was awesome the way we did it. It also helped our teams to come together, right? You would have seen, like, in many aspects there was a lot of ownership within the team to do it. And finally, yes, like towards the end of the program, when we asked the team to come up with one word about the program, teamwork stood out, and I can't agree more to that. So kudos to the team. In any process is only as good as the team, and here I would say this team was really awesome.
That's so excellent. Thank you for sharing those points with us. I just have a couple more questions, and I see some coming through too that Eric will share. But one of the things that you mentioned was that it was so simple. Just talking about, it was so simple, and I'm going to assume it's simple because there was some Scrum experience, and you had a lot of, great technical things going on. What else did you really like about it? Like, why do you think it worked? Because when you put up your bio, you have other scaling experience, and you are educated at other frameworks. Why this one?
Oh, that's a good question. So just to reiterate, right, so one thing is for sure, like as I said, it provided frequent opportunities to collaborate, inspect, and adapt. That to me was one main aspect why I really liked this. And the other one is bottom-up intelligence. It was not really driven top-down. There was so much coming from bottom-up. Like we tried involving the team members pretty much throughout the program, and that obviously increased the level of ownership as well. And over and above that, it's the transparency. Now that pretty much everybody knew what was going on in the program at any given point of time, and also we had this visual management and other aspects which kind of took care of the management as well.
Excellent. Now that you've mentioned it, I was recently at a meetup in Munich for Management 3.0, and we were talking about Nexus. And one of the questions that they asked me, and that I'm going to now pass on to you just so you can share your experience, is what role did management have in this for you guys at Capital One?
Actually, I gave them a tough time. So, so
what support did you have or did not have?
So it's like, I gave them a tough time, but also hats off to my manager who trusted me completely in trying this out. Like he said, I am backing you. If you think this is the right way to go, please go ahead. Because I heard a lot of comments around, hey, Capital One, let you do this, because Capital One has a lot of, it's more a safe shop. Like there are a lot of projects running in safe methodology. So it was surprising for many to hear that we were led to try something new. So hats off to my manager for that. But I also gave him a hard time, because now that we had clear transparency, every time we run into any bottleneck, I made him accountable. So I always went back to him and said, like, I need you to somehow clear this impediment for me. So and he was there to help me with that. And sometimes, there were back and forth negotiations and things like that. But if you ask my manager, he would say it was hard.
Kudos to your manager and kudos to you, because it sounded like you expressed a lot of courage, and that you're a great Scrum Master. So I'm finished with my questions. I don't know, Eric, if there are any more that are coming in.
Oh, there's plenty coming in, and I'll try to go through them. And I'm sure we won't get to them all within the hour, but feel free to reach out if you have further questions as well. So, Valar, how long were your sprints?
It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks cadence.
Right. So there were 2-week sprints. There was a question here, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Did you ever consider going to shorter sprints?
Actually, no. Primarily because with so many team members coming together, I mean, we were targeting an integrated product increment, and keeping it more shorter would have made it a lot more complex, is how I'm thinking. So no, we didn't think about going further below 2 weeks.
Right, yeah, and I think once especially when you're working on something of this size and magnitude, if you start going too short, it becomes difficult to organize and keep the teams together and sync as well. So another question that had come in is, how did you get the teams to start going from, right? Because you did a transformation really here, from teams working on their own features and their own things to really working to deliver together as a team. Do you have any examples of conversations that you had with the team to get them to start thinking in this new way? Because it really was a new way that you got them to start thinking.
Yeah, we did like a onboarding presentation. So I would say that helped a lot. Every member who joined, we made sure they understood the why part of the project, why we are doing it, why are we here, why is it so urgent, what will happen if we don't meet this deadline, and why we are not going feature, like because there are so many. So like we made sure everybody were convinced at the beginning when they were onboarded to the project, and we set that expectation upfront, and I think that helped a lot. Actually, now that this is coming up again, I want to mention one aspect. Like, remember we did retrospect the product backlog, and then we delivered 3 weeks ahead. So the last feature that we felt like it wasn't really urgent, we kind of kept pushing out, and this was one case where like management was insisting that a particular team should be made responsible for that feature, and then we kept pushing back. And like when that happened, and later when we asked other teams to pitch in to help that team to finish that feature, because that was the only thing that was pending for our May end delivery, in the same team that was working so well together until then had a lot of issues, interpersonal issues, when it came to that particular feature, primarily because we declared that feature to be responsible for a particular team, like the team owning it, and then when we said other teams has to help, now it more looked like they are not part of it. That's what we want to get out of. That mindset is what we really don't want to happen. And then this was a lesson. I mean, like we took this example back to management and say, this is what happens when you try to make different teams own different features.
Sure.
So it was a learning for everybody.
That's a really good sharing for everybody, because one of the things that we talk about Nexus is, yes, it's about lifting up that transparency, but it's also about this network and this cohesion and having that focus. Ultimately, you know, we're all doing what we're doing is to try to deliver back value to the customer. And when you're talking about having those discussions at the beginning to make sure that everybody's kind of going in the same direction, that is so important, because there's so much data and so many teams that I talk to where there's that really big disconnect between, you know, what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they're just building stuff, and who the customer is, whether that's internal or external, and that disconnect is going to be part of that change, right? How can you, if you don't know what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and why, then there's going to be no empathy, and there's not going to be any creativity and ownership around that. So I'm really excited to hear kind of you know, how you set that up, and then actually having that learning experience to share back with your management team.
Great. So there's a question, I don't know, Trish, if you want to take this, or Valar, or maybe a little bit of both, because it could be some good experience here, but a question's come in a couple of times of where does design fit into to the work that you were doing, and you know, how did design fit into Scrum in general and what you're working on?
Valar, how did you guys fit that in?
Okay, in our case, so there was this base team which was formed somewhere beginning of Jan. This was like a month and a half before we kickstarted this. So again, architecture and design evolved a lot in that 1 to 1.5 months before we kickstarted in March. Even when we started, I mean, I would say both architecture and design kind of evolved. There were certain decisions that were made before we started, but a lot of things actually evolved. I mean, it was funny that actually, I think around the 4th sprint is when we had the architecture diagram finalized, and we could actually put it in a SharePoint and share it with the team, telling, hey, this is our final architecture. So yeah, so it was not, yes, there was a little bit of upfront, but many decisions were made as we went.
And just, you know, from my experience, I think it's the same as well, which is design is part of everything that you do, and the best way to make sure you have the right designs is you implement them as you're designing them. So in all of the Scrum teams and Nexus teams I've been involved in, you know, we have a designer that might be across multiple Scrum teams, but they're designing and we're implementing those designs as we're working to be able to actually validate it. There's no better way to validate designs than to actually have them implemented versus looking at a really, really pretty PDF or JPEG file that just isn't reality, that you can't click on, that you can't do things with. And in Scrum, that's the whole idea, is I can start to experiment and I can start to play with that and actually deploy it into something that's workable so that I can use it and get that immediate feedback from my users. So that's a great answer. Thank you, Valar.
Yeah.
And I was obviously, Eric just did a great job with our new website, actually implementing that way. And I would say from my own experience, and you know, Scrum doesn't have a specific answer for this, but you have to be smart about how you do it. The one thing you do want to avoid is really being, I mean, there's nothing more fun and entertaining than just doing a lot of design up front, but you probably want to time box that and limit that within your sprints for obvious reasons.
So Trish, this might be for you, and Valar can probably chime in, but can you describe the I guess this is specific to you, Valar, but then, you know, I think maybe Trish on the overall knit. Describe the technical solution owner role that sat on your knit, and what are the overall roles of the individuals, and how does the knit really kind of come together?
Okay, so the tech solution owner was like, I would say, the decision maker. He wasn't the one who was defining the architecture and design for the solution, but when there were contentions or when there were discussions, he was there to kind of make a decision on what approach we need to take, what design we need to do at a particular case. And he is one of the folks who was there right from the beginning of the project. So it was like he was focusing on the technical aspects of the solution, and then we had the PO who was focusing on the business aspects of the solution. And we made sure that they two together are synced all the time, and make sure they're coming up with a solution that's compatible to both. That's how the role was segregated. I don't know if that answers the question, or is there more to that?
I think it does. I don't know, Trish, if you want to just hit real quick on, you know, what is the Nexus integration team, and you know, some of the ideas behind it, because I know that is sometimes a confusing aspect of Nexus.
Sure. So really quickly, the Nexus integration team is comprised of the product owner, right? So it sounds like that's what happened at Capital One. And then generally a Scrum Master. So Valar, I don't know if you were a Scrum Master that was on the Nexus integration team, and if you were just on that, but there's a Scrum Master, right? So
yeah, I'm
the
Scrum Master for the net team. Yeah.
Excellent. So then generally there are people who are comprised of the different teams that just have that role, Nexus integration team. And that Scrum Master might be somebody who's on that one of the individual Scrum teams also, and I've seen it both ways, right? And so generally, what I've seen is when you're starting a Nexus, and there's just a lot of complexity, a lot of things going on, there's usually a dedicated Scrum Master that is just on that Nexus integration team. But the purpose of that role now is that there are people who are on the different teams, and it's kind of, and we say this all the time, they are us and we are them. So if there's different coaching, if there's different things that are going on, we're representing the team so that we have a voice, and it's because of that scale that needs to exist, and just to make sure that everything's going the same way. And so Richard Hundhausen, actually, who's a professional Scrum trainer and also one of the contributors to the Nexus Guide, he explains it like this: it's almost like the Scrum Master is the Scrum, right? These are the people who are kind of making sure that we're headed in the right direction in terms of, are we integrating, is there dependencies, how do we do that, how do we make sure that everybody knows about that, and what it might look like for you might look different than another company just based on the size of your Nexus and, you know, a lot of different things. I should say that, because I'm just watching the time, that we have in conjunction with the book that's being released December 15th by Scrum.org on Nexus, is that there will be an update to the Nexus Guide, and we've done a lot of learning since it's been released, and there will be some more clarification around the roles in terms of what we've learned, and hopefully some more things that can be learned there.
So I know we're about at time, and I want to be courteous to the time box and to the participants. So I want to, if we can just go to the next slide, Patricia. I'd like to thank Valar and Trish for the work that they've done, putting this together, answering your questions, and so on. Congratulations, Valar, on the work that you've done with Capital One in helping to make this a success. Definitely check out the blog, check out forums, but also make sure you read the Nexus Guide. Some of the questions that I've seen come in are evident that maybe not everybody has read the Nexus Guide. So go check that out at scrum.org/scaling scrum, or just go to resources and click on Scaling Scrum and check out the Nexus Guide. Watch the videos that are out there, and certainly we'll be passing out over the next couple of weeks a discount code for the book that Patricia mentioned as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, certainly thank our presenters, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.